components, that make up a bow drill set. Now obviously there's a lot of ways of starting a friction fire. The fire plow like you saw Tom Hanks do in Castaway, the hand drill like you see the Aborigines do, the bow drill, the pump drill. There's a few different sets. Now, to me, if you ask me which one's easiest, I would say the bow drill. Of course, the first component, starting from the ground up, is going to be your fireboard or your baseboard. Now this right here is a piece of cedar. It seems that if you're successful or you're a failure at this, success is the culmination of doing 1,000 little things correctly. So just starting off, until you've developed this as a skill, it would probably help if you removed as many of the variables as possible. So to me, one of the most key elements to doing this correctly is your wood selection. It took me probably 2 years to get my first fire going. And I think it was because the wood I had chosen was still wet. It wasn't properly dried. Now when I went back, later on with that same wood, I was able to get a fire going rather quickly. So if you were to take a piece of store-bought cedar, put it in your oven on 180 degrees for a couple hours, make sure it's dry, at least you've removed that as a variable. And you know that if you're having an issue, it doesn't have anything to do with your wood selection. So that's a good way to start, and this is the piece I used to teach myself exactly what I was doing. And then as you graduate and you're able to put some fires together, you'll just start using, as you become more of a purist, you'll start using the native wood that's around. Now that cedar that we had collected earlier, here's the branches that we had just cut down, and we've just cut it in half, okay? You want it to lay as flat as possible, and then we'll just shave some of the surface off here. And we'll start using this as a fireboard today. So that's our baseboard. Now, as far as what types of woods you should use for the fireboard and for the spindle, what you're looking for, cedar is a favorite of mine. I know up here, we've got aspen, poplar, willow, staghorn sumac. We've got some of that today as well. I would stray away from pine, spruce, resinous type woods. I would also stray away from things like oak. So what you're looking for is more of a medium density type wood. If it's too soft, you're just going to bore right through the wood very quickly, and the wood kind of just disintegrates. So you're looking for something kind of medium density like this cedar here. Now the spindle, I'll use the exact same species of wood on the spindle as I will for the baseboard or for the fireboard. Now, how long should the spindle be? A good rule of thumb would be from your pinky to the end of your thumb, okay? So you're probably looking at 7 or 8 inches, okay, for the spindle. Anything longer than that, and you're going to have difficulty trying to keep it stable as you're using the bow. Anything shorter, and it becomes the rope or the cordage will tend to drift up or down, and you'll lose the grip on the spindle. So try and keep it around 6 or 8 inches long is ideal, and preferably about the width of your thumb, or the diameter or circumference of your thumb. Now, as far as how you whittle these down, what you want least amount of friction on top, and of course you want the most amount of friction on the bottom where it's making contact with your fireboard. So what we'll do is we'll take this and we will try and keep this at a very narrow point at the top where it's going to come into contact with our bearing. So we'll just point that. And then on the bottom, you want it rounded, okay? Kind of like the bottom of a broomstick, or I'm sorry, the top of a broomstick there, and you can see what that looks like. So that's what's going to sit in our baseboard and is going to give us the most friction on the bottom. One more note on this. As you carve this, you don't want it to be rounded, okay? It's okay if you have flat edges. If anything, it's preferable to have flat edges, kind of like the old muzzleloader barrels, okay, the old octagonal flintlock rifles, because what it does is it gives you more of a grip on the rope so that the rope doesn't slide. It's more of a gear, if you will. And if you notice that the rope that your cordage is slipping, you could start to square your spindle again and put some edges on it, and you could also tighten your cordage. So enough said on the spindle. Now, another very crucial component of this would be your bearing block. Now, again, as a cheater, if you're going to go and buy some wood from Lowe's or Home Depot and you're removing that as a variable, this is one of the components that if you don't have a good bearing block, it's going to make this very difficult. So as you can see, this is just a double shot glass, all right, that we've wrapped some duct tape around. And when you're teaching people or when you're learning yourself, if you haven't done this yet, this makes it very easy to manipulate the spindle and keep your focus on starting that fire. So, and then as you get the fire, okay, and you learn how it should feel and you develop it as a skill, then you look for things like rocks that have natural indentations or dimples in them. Now, this is great because if you're in a survival situation, you're obviously not going to have a shot glass wrapped in duct tape. But the thing about using a rock or something of that nature is you've got to be very focused on keeping this level. If I adjust my hands one way or the other at a level, the spindle's going to pop out, and it makes it much more challenging and difficult to start a fire using a rock. Now, some people will talk about taking another rock and notching out a little hole by tapping a harder rock. To me that's unrealistic. If you're in a survival situation, you don't want to spend 8 hours making a bearing. So for expediency and for economy of time, if you will, something you could do is just grab a harder type of wood. So if, I said you don't want to use oak for your baseboard or for your spindle, but where you may want to use oak is for your bearing block. And because it's harder, it should make it so that the spindle is going to bore down into the fireboard vise into the bearing. So I'll get 2 or 3 fires out of just using something like oak, and it's very expedient. It only takes a few minutes to make up something like this. So if I were in a real survival situation, I probably wouldn't be looking for a rock or a dropped deer antler or something of that nature. I'm just going to grab a piece of oak or hardwood and use that. Okay, and then lastly would be our bow. Now, typically for the bow, you want a piece of live wood, not dead wood, because the dead wood is going to snap as you bend it. You want it to have some flex to it. Okay, doesn't have to be too thick. Again, it's probably the width of my thumb at the base. I prefer something about 4 feet long. Okay, it gives you a little bit longer of a stroke as you're employing the drill. And then for the cordage, this is 550 cord. So yes, you may say it's cheating because when am I going to find that out in the field? Well, you're going to have to improvise. You've got shoelaces on, okay? You can make cordage out of a variety of plants, and that's a class for another day. Or I've got a t-shirt on. If I needed to, I could take my knife and I could cut around the edge of my t-shirt and cut off a strip, twist it, and use that as cordage. So if my life depended on it, I would probably do something like that before using my shoelaces, because I need to keep my shoes on if I have to walk out of the woods. So, all right, enough said on that. Let's see if we can get a fire going. Okay, now we've taken our wood and we've cut a flat bottom on it. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to shave off a flat spot on the top. Okay, I don't want this too thick, maybe a 1/2 inch. All right, now that I have that flat spot, I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to drill in a little starter hole where I could put my spindle into to burn a hole. Doesn't have to look pretty, okay? Some people may ask, why do I have such a big knife? I would much rather use a knife that I can chop wood with than some of the smaller bush knives, because I can pretty much accomplish anything with this that I could with the smaller knife. Okay. Okay, so all I did was create a little pilot hole. Also, I want to keep my bow level with the ground. If I raise the tip, the 550 cord is going to start to rise up on the spindle, and it's going to end up coming between the bearing, and it's going to flip out. Also, if I go too low, it might pop out the bottom. So try and keep the drill level with the ground as you're drilling, and keep the spindle as vertical as you can. Okay, I'll go till I see smoke for a little bit, then I'll stop, and if you notice, I've got a well-burned and defined hole. I'll let you zoom in on that so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So I didn't want to go too deep, but now that that's burnt in, okay, our next step is to carve in our notch. So now what I want to do is carve in the notch facing me so I can see the notches